We usually talk about love like it's a fairy tale of perfect harmony, but it's more accurate to describe it as handing someone a loaded gun, pointing it directly at your own chest, and trusting them not to pull the trigger. Strip away the dragons and the magic, and Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen become a psychological mirror. Their story shows us the raw reality of what happens when duty and emotion finally collide. You can see the tension in their first meeting at Dragonstone. Daenerys is at the peak of her power and expects total compliance, but Jon stands his ground. He is an immovable, detached object who refuses to bend to an absolute power. Human connection follows specific behavioral metrics. Mapping their frameworks reveals two distinct paths: the conqueror, fueled by ego, and the survivor, grounded in duty. When you put these two together, this friction creates a cycle of massive instability. When two absolute truths collide, the system eventually breaks, because one person's foundational worldview has to be destroyed for the other to survive. Daenerys built her identity on a foundation of external markers, titles, power, and the expectation of absolute control over her environment. Her success led to a messiah complex. This created a cognitive distortion, where she believed her vision for a new world was so righteous that it justified burning anything that stood in her way. But this left her vulnerable to the void, the psychological space of chaos and isolation that takes over when a person's external support structures fail. Because she relied on the validation of others, she surrounded herself with people who either feared her or fed her ego. She had plenty of followers, but few true allies who could keep her grounded in reality. When she lost that fragile support system and her control slipped, the grief and betrayal left her without any remaining psychological defenses. She unraveled. People who build their entire worth on external validation will eventually be consumed by that void when the world stops agreeing with their myth. Jon Snow was built differently. He was a detached outcast, a bastard who was told by the world from day one that he was worthless. He was forged in the cold. Hardship taught him to earn his value over time through endurance and struggle, rather than demanding it through birthright. This gave him a sense of worth that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Unlike Daenerys, he didn't need a throne or a savior narrative to know who he was. This difference in their foundations created a breaking point. Daenerys eventually demanded that Jon erase his true identity to protect her narrative. She wanted him to choose her lie over his own truth. A relationship cannot survive when one person is required to disappear for the other to feel secure. By asking him to deny who he was, she removed the last bit of common ground they had left. Jon eventually had to bypass his own emotions to execute a clinical decision. He chose to protect the realm from a tyrant who had fallen in love with her own fire. He utilized the cold calculus of sacrifice. It's the decision to accept a painful reality over a beautiful lie, because he recognized that the alternative leads to total destruction. This freedom requires the fortitude to hold the knife, severing ties with the things that poison your peace. To make that choice, you must accept the burden of being the villain, destroying your own reputation for the sake of truth. You see, life will eventually test your boundaries. You'll meet people who cast a dangerous shadow, who promise you everything while demanding that you compromise who you are. Build your internal foundation now. If you learn to stand alone in the void, you won't be destroyed when your external support structures inevitably fall away. If the person you loved most became the primary threat to your survival, would you have the strength to make that same devastating choice?